a family home is a non-qualified asset, meaning it's not a retirement asset. It has a different tax structure. It has different components of how it can be distributed versus a retirement plan, which is fully taxable. And if it's not done correctly, can cause people lots of heartache and problems. But it's also an asset that continues to grow tax deferred if transferred the right way. Right. So when you're looking at something that has a future tax impact versus looking at something that has an immediate tax impact, it's not equal.
Yeah,
so that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make, thinking, right. Oh, well, the numbers are even, but they're not equal.
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. I'm very happy to let you join us today because we have Donna LaScala, who is a financial specialist, to talk to us about financial issues that come up in divorce and how you can keep your kids in mind. Welcome, Donna. So nice to see you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. It's a pleasure.
I know you from the trainings that you've done at the New York State Council on Divorce Mediation. I've attended several of your classes, and you're so clear and thoughtful about the challenges facing families going through transitions, and you know, you're an excellent presenter. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Me too.
So just to start, please tell us something about what has brought you to this work, how you have ended up doing the work that you're doing, and I guess tell us something about your work as well.
Okay, so I've been a financial advisor for a little over 30 years, but about 22 years ago, I happened to be renting space in a law firm, and it was a 5-person law firm, and one of the attorneys was a divorce attorney. So he and I started chatting when he would have a case, when he would be working with his clients, putting together the settlement. And he would ask me certain questions from a financial perspective. What makes more sense? Should I ask for this asset versus that asset? So we really started working very closely together. And then I would start to consult with his clients that were going through divorce about what assets they would be receiving, what to do with those assets after the divorce was final, and how to use them in order to live their lifestyle and continue to support their children, keep a roof over their heads, all of those things that happen. So I started doing that, as I said, about 22 years ago. Then I met one of our colleagues, Ada Haslacher, during a presentation that she did at a networking group that we were both members of, and I became fascinated by the mediation world. So I then got trained as a mediator, not to actually do the mediations myself, because I knew that wasn't my strong suit, but to be able to work more closely with legal professionals and have a better understanding of how the law works and how the process works. I then went through a divorce of my own, and I realized what difficulty people really do go through when they don't have financial knowledge, when they don't have someone sitting next to them or advising them about what to ask for, what not to ask for, how things work, how money moves, and what their life is going to look like after they sign that settlement.
Yeah, so and there's so many financial elements to it. And often people are getting like a large payment, or, you know, they're certainly their household situation is changing financially. And there are just so many moving parts that absolutely they can benefit from having an expert helping them to understand all of the parts and consider options.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that even though we run our own finances, individuals run their own finances, they invest in their retirement plans, they don't really have an understanding of the mechanics of how certain things work. And that's very important when you're looking at division of assets, the mechanics and what not to do and what you should do in order to make sure that you're not hurting yourself in the end. So after I took the CDFA training, which is Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, I also took the collaborative training because I really strongly believe that a lot of people are not well served by the traditional litigated divorce situation.
Well, and financially, it can be just,
Daunting.
yeah. I mean, people spend, I'm sure you've seen it, you could probably tell us stories of people who have ruined their children's future, their children's college
Absolutely.
options because they just spent money on litigation. People have no idea.
Exactly. The tens of thousands of dollars that are wasted only because the court is very bogged down and it's a very slow moving process. And you spend a lot of time getting nothing accomplished.
Right.
And, especially on Long Island, where the statistics are that 90%, if not more, of litigated divorces get settled out of court anyway. Why are you actually paying for a process that's not working and is not serving you when you can actually do a lot of things that are more specific to your situation and better for your life plan after the divorce?
That's such an interesting point because I think that in the litigation process, it's focused on going to trial. And
Correct.
the lawyers spend hours and hours doing things to prepare for a trial. It's like, I mean, a trial is like a choreographed process. And it's almost like actors preparing for a show, memorizing their lines for their opening statements and their closing statements and their arguments. And then 90% of them are not going to ever get to be on that stage because they're going to settle a lot of cases settle what they say on the courtroom steps as they're going in for the day of the trial or the week before or 2 weeks before, and they just finally settle it. And so they've spent hours and hours preparing for something that they're never going to use.
It's so true. And the thing, I make a joke out of it, but we've had, at the New York State Council, we've had panels of judges at our symposiums. The first time I actually saw the judge who was in charge of my case, my divorce case 10 years ago, was on a panel.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh my God, that's what he looks like. I used to say to people, I never saw the judge. I was never in the courtroom. I wouldn't know him if I tripped over him on the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
Because I was one of those 90% cases that I was settling my case with the help of my attorney, of course, myself. But what was very interesting to me was that my attorney at the time said to me, I wish more of my clients had the knowledge that you have from the financial standpoint. And I said, that was the day that the light bulb went off over my head. And I became, driven to be on a mission to provide that service to people going through divorce, because you can make so many mistakes. And as we talked about at the last presentation that I did for the New York State Council, there are so many red flags and so many mistakes that can be made and so many things that can go wrong that as a financial professional, those things just pop right out for me, but may not present themselves in the same way for the attorney, the mediator, the client, or anyone else that's working in the process, because I hear things differently.
Can you share like some of those pitfalls or things that you've seen people do that, they're shooting themselves in the foot, but they don't realize it?
Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is not understanding what assets they have and what they represent. And people will look at the bottom line numbers and say, okay, well, his 401k is $450,000 and the value of our marital home after you deduct what mortgage is there is $450,000. So that's an even swap. And the hair on the back of my neck stands up because it's not an even swap, because people just look at the bottom line values and they don't understand that the value of a home, a family home, is a non-qualified asset, meaning it's not a retirement asset. It has a different tax structure. It has different components of how it can be distributed versus a retirement plan, which is fully taxable. And if it's not done correctly, can cause people lots of heartache and problems. But it's also an asset that continues to grow tax deferred if transferred the right way. So when you're looking at something that has a future tax impact versus looking at something that has an immediate tax impact, it's not equal.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
see.
one of the biggest mistakes that people make, thinking, oh, well, the numbers are even, but they're not equal.
Yeah.
And then they look at expenses. I spend a lot of time looking at the expenses of the family. I spent so much time with this one couple. They came with this fabulous, to them, spreadsheet, which to me was a ticking time bomb, because they had everything just together, and they were kind of just looking at, oh, well, we spent, $5 here and $15 there. And they weren't categorizing what they were spending the money on.
Oh, so that it was like one spreadsheet for the family, and it wasn't broken out to his expenses, her expenses, and kids' expenses.
And that was the key point. And that's what I kept focusing them on. What is this expense and who does it belong to?
Right.
Is it a husband expense? Is it a wife expense? Is it a child expense? Because what I needed them to focus on, which is what a lot of people don't do, what are the two of you individually responsible for and are going to continue to be individually responsible for, versus what are you still jointly responsible for as far as your children are concerned?
Right.
And one of the biggest pitfalls for couples is that they don't really know how much they're spending on their children.
Right.
And they want their children to have everything. Don't we all, as parents? We want our kids to have everything.
Right.
And they don't really know how much they're spending.
Yeah.
And then I get the question, well, how can I take away from my child? They're going through enough right now that we're splitting up and we're getting divorced and we're going to be in two separate households. And how do we make this decision?
Right. And they want to protect their kids so much. I had a case once where I guess the kid's birthday had come up, and I just was before the session saying, like, making chit chat and saying, what did you do for her birthday? And the mom said, well, I did a Build-A-Bear workshop. It's the whole phenomenon of the divorcing mom who feels so guilty that she's spending way more than she should on the kid's birthday party. And I was really startled. I just hadn't thought of it in those terms, that that she was making decisions. She was making financial decisions to, like, spend this hundreds of dollars that she didn't have, put it on a credit card because of her guilt. And I mean, there's so many statistics about people after divorce, especially women after divorce, that their household incomes go down and the children's standard of living goes down. And here was an example of why.
Absolutely. And I also have these two conversations. First thing I ask people is, what does this money mean to you? And they tell me a whole host of things, but it's the words that they use and the things that they tell me that give me a clue as to the emotions that are behind the decisions that they're making. Because money, even though money is really a barter system, it's how we exchange goods and services. They have imbued so much emotion into this money, and they start fighting over things that are meaningless in the grand scheme of things. And it's scary, because they start trying to hold on to things that they really don't need. They don't even want them sometimes, but they just become so fearful of letting things go. So that's thing number one. What does this actually mean to you? Thing number two is, I have the following conversation. as a society, we have become an instant gratification, delayed consequence society. We also need to understand the difference between want and need. And that also applies to your children. Because think about your kids when they were little. And we all make a joke out of it. I bought them this really beautiful, expensive gift, and they're playing with the box. So, what do kids really need? Don't kids really need your attention? Don't kids really need your love? Don't kids really need to feel secure? Does any of that really involve money?
Right. Is an
No.
American Girl doll going to make your kid feel like you're hearing her? No.
Exactly. Exactly. Unless the doll's talking and responding in AI, I'm not so sure. But this is what gets people bogged down in the process,
Yeah.
because they're just, okay, I'll just throw money at this problem and it'll go away.
Right.
Well, it doesn't go away. It
Yeah.
just makes it worse.
Right. Well,
And
it means that in addition to the child not feeling heard or paid attention to, you also have credit card debt, to add to your stress.
correct. And then we always have to have the education conversation.
Mhm.
So it's daunting for most parents
Yeah.
that higher education expenses just keep rising.
It's terrible. I mean, college admission is down, I've heard, because I think a lot because of the cost and the terrible student loan debt that some kids are coming out of college with. It's such a problem.
Well, not only kids, but parents,
Right.
because there are limited resources for loans and grants and scholarships. There are just limited resources. So if you don't qualify for any of those things, and if you've ever filled out a FAFSA, most people, when I filled out the FAFSA for my older daughter, I made a joke. I said, well, this actually told me I can send the entire community to college, but that's not happening. So, it's like, how do they even come up with these figures? I don't know. But there are limited resources. So then you have to really think, what am I doing to my child by saying to them, I will send you to an Ivy League school, even though you're going for a liberal arts degree? Does this make sense? And parents don't want to have that conversation. They want to say, okay, but they can get into that school. Well, yeah, they can, but is that really where they belong? And is that really serving anyone? How much debt are you going to have? How much debt are they going to have coming out with this education? And,
And not to mention, how is it going to limit your child's choices down the road? If your child wanted to be a community activist for working on global warming, they might have to take a job doing computer programming instead, because they have this
right.
these loans that have to be paid every month. So it's going to limit you want college to broaden your child's future and options, but instead the debt is tied up with that, and it could limit their options.
Absolutely, because the statistics also show that, especially for women, and this is very scary, especially for women, the difference in income between a bachelor's degree and a master's degree is not that large a difference.
Mm.
How much money are you actually spending on an education for an income that's not going to meet the requirements of the debt service that you have?
Yeah.
So I spend a lot of time, and I also encourage my clients to reach out to college planning professionals that can help them really look at all the options that are available and have a family conversation. It's not everyone that has, well, grandma and grandpa have all this money and they're going to pay for the kids' education. That's a lovely thing if you have that available to you, but most people don't.
Yeah.
So, you have to really just kind of give them a dose of reality And that's a hard conversation to have.
So it seems to me that, well, I guess I want to say two things. One is when you were talking about starting out by asking, what does this money mean to you? Like, I think that's really brilliant because, sometimes you're really surprised at the answers you get. I have a couple that I'm working with who have, both of them have credit card debt for various reasons. The husband is earning less than he used to, and the wife lost her job and hasn't been able to find, she's been looking for 7 months and she just hasn't found another job yet. And they're going into debt. And then we were talking about their financial overview, and the husband said, well, what about that $800,000 that you have in that investment account? And I was like, what? And it turns out she had inherited that from her parents, her mother, I guess, who died second, and she wouldn't touch it for anything. And, it was just sitting there. I think it was like in a money market fund, like it was earning, 0.3% at that point. Now maybe she's earning 3%, but it was just sitting there not touched. And then she has credit card debt. She's racked up about $30,000 of credit card debt, and she's paying 22% interest on that. And, it's like, just put those things together, but she can't because it's her mother.
Right. So that brings up a very interesting point, because I actually just worked on a case with a colleague of ours where the couple had significant joint credit card debt, but they each had some resources separately. And so we sat down with them, and that's basically why I was called into this case, because there was no way that they were going to be able to afford to live in separate households with the amount of debt that they had collectively. So I sat down with them and I said, okay, here's the bottom line. In order for this to work, you're both going to have to equally feel the pain. So what are you willing to do? And then I gave them some options about how they could use the resources that they had in order to get rid of the debt. There are things that I recommended for this particular couple that I don't necessarily recommend to everyone, like taking loans from retirement plans. But since they were both relatively young and had a number of years left before retirement, because we're talking about a couple in their 40s, I said to them, okay, this is a very immediate, acute situation that in order for you to be able to move forward, you both have to equally experience the pain of taking money from future resources now in order to get rid of this debt collectively to be able to move on separately. And they agreed. You have to kind of bridge that gap between the future and the present and the reality.
Yeah.
So that really worked with that particular couple. But a lot of times I tell people the following story. Now, I've said this story a couple of different times in a couple of different venues, but it's one of my favorites, and I call it Aunt Millie's Teapot. Now, when I was getting divorced, we get called into this huge room with the special referee, he's in the judge's chambers and whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And it's a whole bunch of people. It's not just an individualized thing. And this guy tells you how things are going to work, what's going to happen, what the timeline is, all those kinds of things. And he cautions you on a number of things. And he said, don't fight over Aunt Millie's teapot. Now, that was the only thing he said, and it stuck with me on the story. And I say to couples, everyone has an Aunt Millie's teapot. I don't know what yours is, but I'm telling you it's out there. So Aunt Millie's teapot, it's that teapot that you got for your first anniversary from your Aunt Millie. And it's the ugliest thing you have ever seen. And you hate it. You both hate it. And so you put it up on the shelf in the closet, in the back. You never think about it unless Aunt Millie comes over, and you take it out, you put it on the kitchen table, and you serve her tea. And then as soon as she leaves, you put it back because, again, you both hate it. You agree that it's ugly, and you never really want to see it again. And now suddenly you're fighting over Aunt Millie's teapot, that thing that you both agreed was hideous, and you hate it. Why? because you want to prevent the other person from having it. Now, is this worth it? Is this worth fighting over?
Yeah.
Is this worth spending time and money fighting over something that neither one of you really want, but you just don't want the other person to have it?
Yeah.
And it's different for everyone. There's something like this client that you were talking about, this $800,000 in her money market account that came from her mother that she is just not willing to even discuss. Why? What is it about this thing? What is the emotion? What is the fear? What's behind this decision that's really not serving you?
Yeah.
And can you see the other possibilities?
Right. And other consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The consequences are what people just cannot wrap their brains around.
Yeah.
Because, it's a gut thing. It's coming from somewhere other than here. And money should be here. It shouldn't be here, but it is.
Yeah.
It's very emotional.
But it always is very emotional. I mean, even though, you think it should be approached rationally. And if your goal is to maximize money, maybe you approach it more rationally. But, I guess another piece of this is that it seems to me that, in 99.9% of cases, divorce is not a good decision financially. Like, that old adage, two can live as cheaply as one. And then when you split into two households, you're adding expenses to the family's financial monthly nut. And, you're both saving for retirement. Now you're splitting the retirement in half. Certainly in New York City, if you have a home, you're not going to sell it for a price that you can buy two homes. I mean, there are some places in the country where you could do that, but not here. I have had cases where people are able to sell the home and buy two, equivalent homes, but it's because they have other funding, other resources, right? Like an inheritance or something like that. And it seems to me that financially, people do better when they join forces, and when they now split those apart, they're not deciding to get divorced because of financial reasons.
Right.
The only exception might be where someone receives a huge inheritance.
Oh, absolutely. But, I also did have a case a couple of years ago where there was a couple that they knew that the husband at some point in not the extremely immediate future, but sometime in the future, was going to receive a substantial inheritance from his parents. They knew it. And they told me right off the bat, it's on the table, because it was always intended to be used for their child's education. So they both told me, yes, this is on. They were logical about it, but they also did have an emotion about it that led them to agree.
Right.
It was still a viable thing to do. Yeah. And that's really the thing that I keep trying to focus people on when they especially have younger children. You have to really understand that the two of you are going to be connected for the rest of your lives. You have children together.
Yeah.
You have to think about them. Right. How it's impacting them, how your decisions are affecting them. But also, don't shoot yourself in the foot because you promised something that is no longer financially feasible. Have the hard conversation.
Right. To say, we all expected this is what was going to happen, but things have changed. That's a very hard conversation. But, sometimes I think it can be like a self-esteem building for a child to be included in the conversation and treated almost like an adult, and saying, we all have to pitch in. We all have to cut back on spending. We all have to try to, increase income. If you want to take that paper out or scoop ice cream to help, that would be fantastic. And then, kids can sometimes pitch in and help too.
Oh, definitely. And if they're spoken to the right way, and if they're asked to understand, it's not because we don't love you, It's not because we don't want to do this for you. It's not your fault, but this is something that is happening for all of us. And we're trying to make the best decisions that we can going forward. And that's the other thing I try to, when I come up with what I call the scenarios. Well, what if this happens? If you do A, B, and C, then X, Y, and Z are going to happen. If you do 1, 2, and 3, then 4, 5, and 6 are going to happen. It's just the way it works. Sometimes A, B, and C don't match with 4, 5, and 6, but sometimes we can move things around to make it work for you. And then the other thing I say is it's not forever, because things are going to change. And that's the scariest thing financially for people to understand. The decision that you make today with your 10-year-old child in mind is not necessarily the decision that's going to work 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Things are going to change. So you need to be flexible enough to realize, okay, we need to rethink this. It's not working. And that's also why mediation, collaboration, it's a much better venue, because there's a little less animosity and there's a little more cooperation. And there's a feeling that, okay, we're all compromising to make this work, and we're keeping the children primarily in the focus of the conversation. What is happening with the family? We're still going to be a family.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like another thing that's possible with mediation or collaborative process, is that the lines of communication are still open. And if circumstances do change down the road, you can get together and talk about it. You can still, because you still have that feeling that like we're joined through our kids. So, it matters if one parent is, doing fantastic and the other parent is struggling to feed the kids.
Right.
The kids they're gonna sense that, and it's better if everybody can just at least have a baseline, for the sake of the kids, and show them that you can do the right thing.
Yeah. And, I say to them, okay, think about all the possible things that could happen between now and when your kid is 22 years old and out of college, that you will have to think about together. And that's when you have to realize, okay, so there's graduations and birthdays and special occasions and weddings and babies. And there's a lot of things that are going to happen after you guys get divorced that you're both going to have to participate in for your children.
Right.
Do you want this to constantly be a point of aggravation?
Yeah.
Because out of every event that's going to happen in your child's life from now until forever. So think about all of those things. The decisions that are going to have to be made jointly. Yeah. So start doing it now, because you'll get good practice at it when they're, 10 years old, when they're 15 years old. By the time you're facing these bigger, my mom always used to say, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. You don't know what's ahead of you. So, try as much as possible to keep the kids in the forefront of your decision making.
Do you find that with a lot of couples that there's like financial illiteracy, at least with one, a lot? Yeah. Like people usually delegate managing finances to one person, and then the other person, and they're divorcing. And especially with mediation and collaborative, in a certain way, we want the clients to be on top of the information so that they can make decisions. And like, it's not like a situation where the lawyer's saying, all right, here's what you should do, or you as a certified divorce financial analyst, you don't come in and just say, okay, here's what you should do. I'm sure you have to, bring them up to speed and then help them make the decisions themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of times there is one person, as you said, that's more financially literate than the other. Mm-hmm. Because And I hate to say this, but it's usually, 7 to 8 times out of 10 that it's the man in the relationship that's been handling the finances. And that is a problem, because then you now have to educate the other person in the couple as to what all of these things are, how they work. And I spend a lot of time having separate meetings with the two people saying, okay, I can speak your language, you understand, this is what's going on. And then another conversation, okay, let's get down to the basics and work our way back up.
And it's better to have those separate meetings with each other, because the financially literate person might need a half an hour to talk about options, but the other person needs more education, might need an hour and a half.
Right. And like this one couple that I'm working with right now, the wife kind of, texted me, emailed me offline and said to me, could we please set up a separate meeting? Because I had so many questions during this joint meeting, and it was the two attorneys and me and the two of them. And she said, I had so many questions and I just really didn't want to ask.
Right. And she didn't want to slow down all the people in the room.
But she also
self-conscious from her.
Right. She was very self-conscious.
Yeah.
So I said, absolutely. So I set up a separate meeting with her. We spent 45 minutes kind of just going through point by point on this spreadsheet saying, okay, this is what this is. This is how we came up with this calculation. This is what it means. This is how it works. And she felt so much better.
Oh, that's great.
And it's, it's not that I'm advocating for one person versus the other. I'm doing my job as the CDFA by providing education. On my website, that is one of the things it says, educate, because people often don't know. Right. So many times people will say to their attorney, oh yeah, I have a pension. They don't have a pension. They have a 401k.
Right.
They have a 403b. They don't even know what they have.
Yeah, they don't.
They think something very different than what the reality is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of education that needs to be accomplished before you can even get them to understand, okay, so now you've accumulated all of this. Now we have to divide this, and this is how it's going to work.
Right.
So
I have a friend who doesn't manage the finances in her household, and she confessed to me that she feels like it's a little bit of like a Cinderella complex, like she just wants to be taken care of. She just has this feeling that she shouldn't have to worry about finances, and her husband handles everything. In my family, my mother always handled everything, and now I handle the finances. So I was like shocked that my friend, who, is a very accomplished working woman with a fantastic job, and yet she's turned it all over to her husband so that she can feel taken care of. People
Absolutely.
are so complex. Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of that too. But again, it's also how you were raised and what your household was like. So you said your mom took care of the finances. Mine did not. But I knew very early on that that's not the relationship I wanted to have as an adult in a relationship with someone. And I really fought against the trend when I first got married, because 30 some odd years ago, 40 years ago, it was still the trend that husband and wife had joint credit cards, and your credit card as the wife said, Mrs. his name.
Mrs. Johnson, right.
Yeah, that's not happening. I'm not doing that. So, I was very, very specific. The reason being, I come from a family of women. My mother was one of 10. There were 9 girls, 1 boy.
My God.
I had 3 sisters. I had 21 first cousins.
Wow.
16 of them were women. So very women-centered. And I knew, this tradition didn't serve many people. It really didn't. So I find a lot of times, because your thought about money, your idea about money is really formed when you're still in single digits. And you learn, even just absorbing as a child, you don't realize what you're learning, but you learn about money at the family dinner table, in your family home, hearing your parents have conversations, have arguments, have struggles, have successes. That's where you learn about money. So
That's so interesting.
all of the things that are spoken about money stick in your head
Yeah.
from very little. And that's the other thing that I tell my clients. Be careful about how you talk about this in front of the kids. Because even though they may not be in the room, they're definitely listening.
Yeah.
They're definitely listening. So what is being said is crucial about what's going to happen financially. And if one of you is speaking in very aggressively fearful terms, your children are going to be afraid of what's
Yeah.
going to happen. And that's the security piece. You have to make them still feel like it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be okay. We're going to make this work. We're going to figure it out. We're the mom, the dad, we're the parents, you're the kid. It's not your responsibility to figure this out, but everyone's going to pitch in and make it work.
Right. So, I guess I would think people sometimes come to see you like on their own. I mean, I'm sure you work with people who are not divorcing as well as people who are divorcing. So they come to you for, I guess I'm just, wondering like, what are the different ways people would find you? Like, certainly as a mediator, I'm, already thinking about couples who I would give your name to, to work with them on the financial piece so that they have your expertise, and in collaborative process as well. But, people must also come to you themselves and.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it all depends. When I work in the collaborative process, I cannot be the financial advisor for either person because
Right.
it's a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm acting as a neutral. So
Right.
even sometimes in a mediation, if I'm being brought in as a neutral, I cannot work with that person as their financial advisor after the fact. However, if they're in litigation, absolutely, because it's more often than not that I'm working with one versus
One
the
of
other.
them. Mm-hmm.
In certain circumstances where they don't have a financial advisor, or if the couple has had a joint financial advisor and one or the other doesn't feel comfortable with that scenario, I can refer them to tons of colleagues, which I often do, for them to then go and say, okay, so now I've got all of this. What do I do with it? And as I said, that's how I actually started out working in the divorce arena, because I was working with an attorney and I was advising the women. It was mostly the women who he had as clients. Okay, so now you've got money from the marital sale of the marital residence. You've got, money from the retirement plan coming to you. What do you do with it? How do you make it work? And let's come up with a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year plan so that you know what your life is going to look like if all of these things happen.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's great. So, I mean, there must be situations where you come in as a neutral, in a collaborative case, let's say, but one person needs more education and handholding than the other person does. And, but that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're very open about that. And I'll say to the other person, if you don't feel comfortable with this, please let me know and we'll bring somebody else in to do that. There are also a lot of times where I just have to bring in other financial professionals because the situation calls for it, such as a forensic accountant. There are certain things that a forensic accountant does that I don't do. There are a lot of things that I do that a forensic accountant doesn't. So sometimes, depending upon the complexity of the situation, there's more than one financial professional involved. So there could be a financial advisor, there could be the CDFA, there could be a financial, I just totally lost my train of thought. There could be a forensic accountant. So it just depends on the complexity of the situation, especially when there's a business involved.
Yeah. So is that when you would bring a forensic accountant in, when there's like
it
one
depends.
of them owns a business, or you're just trying to figure out like, I mean, I had a couple who came in who have, like, they have real estate in 6 countries. And, you know, they're both entrepreneurs. And I said, we're going to need a financial specialist because, like, your stuff is all over the world, and I don't even, I don't know what everything is, and I need somebody to, like, look at all of this and help us make sure that we have everything on the table, that we have all the information we need.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with a forensic, it's usually when it's required, it's necessary to do a business valuation, because that's really their specialty. We have a lot of colleagues that are forensic accountants that specialize in business valuation.
Yeah.
That's a very specific niche thing to do. Yeah. If we're just looking at what expenses are being passed through the business, where the income is derived, you don't necessarily need a forensic accountant for that. A CDFA can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
And especially if there's if there's a CPA working with the couple, that they own the business, and the CPA is the accountant for the business, then I can talk to that person and say, okay, please provide me with all of these reports. Let me see what's going on. If there's something odd, then I'll call in a forensic, because they can do the investigative deep dive into the business that I won't necessarily feel as comfortable doing. So it's as
like a smell test.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I'm not so sure.
A little off, right?
Yeah. So let's look a little bit further into this, because I think there's something going on here.
I also have found, oh, sorry.
Or when I see that suddenly assets are moving with no explanation.
Yeah.
If suddenly one member of the couple is investing in crypto, like, wonder why that's happening all of a sudden. Because with crypto assets, the paper trail is a little bit more difficult to follow. So that's, again, where I might bring in a forensic.
Interesting.
It just depends. When it's something like, if one person has restricted stock units, that's definitely my area of expertise, and valuing those RSUs and, employee stock option plans and retirement plans and pensions and all of that. Then that's definitely my area. I can do that. But when things are just a little not looking so good, then I call in a forensic, because I want them to do the deeper investigation into what's happening.
Well, Donna, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I could just keep talking to you. And we've gone pretty long because I couldn't stop asking you questions. So
there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on to keep the kids in mind. And we'll put your contact information in the show notes so that people can reach out to you. And I look forward to seeing you at the next conference, or perhaps before that, if we work on a case together.
Would love that.
Yeah, that would be great. And I guess I'll be calling you with my questions.
Perfect. You know how to find me.
Thank you so much for your work and your expertise.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.